Department of Public Health, approved that I actually graduated. And my main research question was why people cook the way they cook, so very much aligned to JustGESI's topics, or also why so many of them do not transition to the available clean energy solution. But I'm not here today to talk about my findings. There is a dissertation that I suppose only my examiners have read so far, so you're welcome to Google it. I'm here today to talk about ethnography in practice and what it meant for me. To talk about ethnography in practice, I thought I had to first talk about ethnography in theory. Now, I'm sure most of us would be familiar with the fact that ethnography is the defining methods of social anthropology, and is a hands-on research method used to collect data through deep and prolonged immersion in the research context to understand the insider point of view. And it provides the empirical basis for anthropological theory. I'm a social anthropologist and I'm quite protective of ethnography being interpreted in those terms as a deep and prolonged immersion in the research context, because it's what informs social anthropology as the discipline that substantially interrogate what it is to be a human, which is kind of Margaret Mead's definition. Social anthropology as the discipline that studies the amazingly diverse way in which people in all parts of the world make a living, organize themselves, make communities, and understand the world. Now, this was a brief introduction of ethnography in theory as a method linked to a discipline. But then, as we know, as a researcher, things are always different on the ground. And I would like now to focus on how was my ethnography in practice. If you have clicked the timing, you realize that 2021 was the time of the pandemic. It was a very challenging time. And what I've tried to do when preparing this presentation today was to try and unveil a bit of the human aspects of doing research. There is a tendency to romanticize, especially ethnography, because anthropologists are seen as these cool people that go in exotic places and do a lot of fun adventures, but there is more to it. And I will try and take you through my story. And to do that, I've prepared these slides many times, and the original version was full of words. Then I decided that I would let the picture speak. So I still have some words that will come together, hopefully, by the end to show why my ethnography was a feminist way of knowing. But as I was trying to find a subheading for this presentation, I thought it could also be rephrased as a slightly egocentric but very down-to-earth presentation of me in very poor outfits, predominantly eating amazing food, because my research topic was about cooking, of course. So bear with me with some of these very mundane insights into my ethnography in practice. Now, obviously, the dearest word for anthropologist is community. The community of Langas is an informal settlement, as I said, in the outskirts of Eldoret town, is home to over 127,000 people, mostly internal migrants that move to Eldoret in search of better job and educational opportunities. It is an informal settlement established on a disputed land, which meant development never really came except for electricity that you can see in this picture. But there is no piped water, no sewage system, and life there is very informal. Why I choose Langas? In January 2020, just before the pandemic, I was lucky enough to do a scoping visit to Kenya with a colleague from the Cleaner Africa project that was conducting a training. And there I met Nancy. Nancy is a very important character in this story. She was at the time a master student in public health, and she was identified by my supervisor as a good person to support me in my ethnography. And she took me around various communities in Kenya, in Uasin Gishu County, which is where Eldoret is based, for me to get a gist of Kenyan culture. It was my first time in Kenya, and to try and understand where it would have made sense to conduct my ethnography. And we chose Langas because we met Collins, which was a resident of Langas, who took us around the settlement. As a resident of Langas and as a community health volunteer, he knew the place very well. And as we were walking along the streets, we saw so many people engage in everyday activities of procuring and consuming energy, mostly because procuring and consuming energy happens outdoors, into the streets, in the patios. And so I was immediately exposed to so many insights related to my research topic. But I also thought that its liminal space between the city of Eldoret and the countryside gave a lot of insight into how traditional and modern ways of cooking are combined in this community. And also because a lot of different ethnic groups live in Langas, Langas was exceptional in trying and showing the richness and the multiple ways in which Kenyan procure energy, which are obviously informed by their culinary preferences that are deeply tied to ethnic traditions. So once Langas was chosen as the community in which I would do my research, the next step was to gain access. We had several meetings with the village elders and the community health volunteers that are both voluntary roles that residents that are particularly engaged with community activity take up. We presented the research, we tried to explain what we were trying to do and what the research would involve, which was predominantly doing participant observation in people's houses and kitchen to understand how energy was procured and consumed and which kind of challenges were associated with transitioning to clean energy. Everything kind of was in place thanks to the incredible gatekeeping role of Collins, but the next word I would use to describe my ethnography in practice is the unforeseen. Now, you would remember these were the time of the COVID pandemic, so January 2020, this is me at Manchester Airport wondering if St. Christopher, protector of the travelers, would be enough for me to get back to Kenya, because it was the time in which they were starting to test people temperature and handing over masks, and we didn't really know what was going to happen. We thought COVID was going to resolve in a couple of weeks, but that wasn't the case. And the next word for me was patience. I was supposed to go back to Kenya in a couple of months, in September 2020, and that did not happen because new waves of the pandemic kept coming up. The world was into a chaos. Each country was dealing it in a different way. I was juggling my UK versus Italy residence, and it was all very complicated, but most especially the University of Liverpool enforced a very reasonable travel ban and the suspension of all data collection activities. And that put me into a big setback because as an ethnographer, I really struggled to think about how I could collect data by not being there. And I was so much in the urge to be there, but I was also conscious of the ethical and practical concern associated to going in a vulnerable community during these very challenging times. I thought I had to drop my PhD and go home. Luckily, that did not happen because at the end of 2020, the University of Liverpool lifted its travel ban. And thanks to a very long bureaucratic process, I could establish a departure day. Obviously, this involved a lot of additional risk assessment and procedure and PPI and mask and PCR tests. But the departure day was established for the 28th of March. I was really excited until President Uhuru Kenyatta gave this announcement 2 days before, saying that he was going to lock down Nairobi starting from the 29th of March at midday. And I was supposed to take a flight past midday to reach Eldoret. That obviously threw me into a chaos again. The word for that was resilience. Because once again I was almost going and I had to rethink my plans. But I managed to find a flight that was leaving earlier from Nairobi to Kisumu. And so this is me finally landing at Kisumu airport. And the word that described that mood was leap of faith, because I wasn't sure I was actually going to make it. Now, I was finally there. So the word that described those first few weeks after I've quarantined was excitement. I was obviously very excited that I could finally travel despite all the pandemic issues. But I also had to remember that I couldn't go straight into people's houses and that I needed to kind of slow down. And this was because the settlement where I was conducting my research was characterized by informality. People living there live very precariously. The unemployment rates are very high. There is a very high level of microcriminality. And I couldn't just expect people to open their doors to me. So I was under the guidance and support of Nancy and Collins, who were hired as official field workers to support my ethnography. And we decided to take a step back so that I could familiarize with the context and get used to its geography, but also the specificity, the socioeconomic specificity of the settlement, kind of find my feet, but also allow the community to get used to my presence and realize there was this white lady strolling around the streets, apparently meaninglessly. But the word informality here has a double meaning, not only informal as informal settlement, but we also had a lot of informal data collection, meaning that we would stop in the street and talk to people that were setting up their fire or collecting firewood or buying charcoal and trying to explain our research and what we were trying to do. And there are various perspectives on this. Some researchers think that this is not really a data collection, but I would like to argue that it provided some very essential insights for me to settle and also to set up my proper ethnography in a good, ethical, and sensible way. So once I could finally find my feet, I started to do household visits with some of the residents we had talked to in the streets who invited me into their houses. And I wanted to learn how they cooked, what was the energy source they used, and for which purposes. The word that described that time was apprenticeship. I had so much to learn, first because I'm not a good cook for a start, but also because everything was new. And I was very privileged to find so many people willing and flattered to teach me how things were done in Kenya. And that required a lot of intellectual and practical humility, because I messed up a lot of time into trying to be useful. There were a lot of things I didn't know how to do, and I had to listen and be taught. And that was a very important growing and learning process for me. This is mostly because, as I'm sure you're aware, ethnography is based on a method which is participant observation. It implies getting involved, getting engaged with your participants and trying to do things as they do them, so that you can really understand yourself, what are the challenges, the constraints, the opportunities of doing things that way. And so there was, of course, a lot of participation and a lot of attempts from me to make ugali or stir a very big pot of ugali. Not sure I was ever of much help, but I think all these moments really gave me the opportunity to also sense with my body, with my smell, with my touch, what it meant to cook in Langas, whether it was in the streets or in these makeshift restaurants or into people houses. And there was a lot of immersion as well. I often like to describe my fieldwork as a lot of time wasting, but in a good way. We often think about data collection as the process of going to someone's house, ask a question, and leave. That wasn't the case for me. I spent entire days with people of Langas, cooking, talking, chatting, also about apparently irrelevant things that still provided a lot of context and really allowed me to get a comprehensive overview of the place energy played in their lives and how energy was interrelated to other aspects and dynamics of their lives. So here is me again attempting to cook samosas with Nancy wearing the mask and one of our research participants hosting us in their house. Another word that anthropologists like is cultural relativism, meaning accepting that things may be done differently in different cultures. And with our Western-centric view, we often think our way of doing things is the normal one. And so we would buy chicken in a supermarket rather than slaughtering it on the grass, which is what is happening here. I was invited to slaughter the chicken myself, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. So here is one of my research participants who was very flattered to have me in their house, that thought a fresh chicken was better than a supermarket one. And another very important word is positionality and privilege. I thought a lot about how to talk about positionality today, because I know it's one of the key questions this session wanted to interrogate. I came to the conclusion that defining positionality for me in the context of my research in Langas is quite difficult, because obviously positionality, again, in theory, is all those aspects of your identity that inform how you relate to research subjects and how research subjects relate to you. But that changes depending on who you're talking to or whose house you're visiting, how wealthy they are, and you are a different person to all of them. Obviously, I was a white lady, privileged, seen as wealthy, friendly, but still sometimes looked at with suspicion. And also it was the time of the COVID pandemic, so I was seen as a carrier of the virus, I'm sure. So there were a lot of things to be remembered, and every day I had to make the conscious effort of trying to reflect on what was I bringing to the table and to make sure that everyone was comfortable with my presence, but also acknowledge my privileges, especially in terms of working in a poor, informal, vulnerable community. I had many requests for, well, marriage, but also being bought a house or asked for money or asked for help, and also a lot of very fragile, vulnerable situation I wasn't actually able to help with. And it was difficult to navigate this because it's very easy to overpromise, and I always have to interrogate the ethics of me being there and what I was actually able to deliver and what would have been a broken promise. Big topic. I'm happy to respond more if there are further questions later. But the word that follows is suspicion, because there was a lot of suspicion from the community. Obviously the village elders and the community health workers were informed about my presence, but especially the younger generation were a bit disconnected from them. So we had to navigate this situation very carefully. We would be stopped in the street and asked why I was there, what I was doing, and how the community would benefit from me being there. And those moments were, some of those moments were actually quite tense, although the guy on the right is not actually trying to hit me with a stick. He was just asking questions and happened to be holding a stick. But yeah, we had to really, we owed them an explanation, and we owed them sitting down and really going with them through why I was there and what I was trying to do. Obviously, the facilitation of Collins and Nancy was essential in this, because I would have not been able to do it myself. There was a lot of risk. Being locked into very smoky kitchen was something I should have anticipated in my risk assessment, but for some reason I didn't. Obviously, I mean, health risk, I mean, being close to big storage of kerosene, being in very questionable gas bottle retailers, but risk took multiple forms in Langas. Like, I couldn't stay after dark because it was considered dangerous. I was a young lady. I had to take a lot of risks, but also to trust my field workers a lot. Trust that they were there for me and that they had a solution when I did not have one. And the trust also, again, informed by risk, and trust are informed by my positionality. I spent a lot of time in kitchen with men, and there was a big gender component of doing my research, because I was interested in seeing what men were able to do in the kitchen and what would convince them to try and have an active role in cooking. But sometimes I was there by myself, and I remember Collins used to joke and say to me, "Don't worry, my cameras are on." And even though he wasn't there, he had established such a good support network and community network for me that I never doubted that I was safe. But again, this goes back to how lucky I was to have the field workers I had. And there is a whole chapter in my thesis about collaborative anthropology and how it's done. And in my thesis, I use the pronoun we, and I've been trying to use it also today when I describe my experience in Langas, because I seriously think that this wasn't my ethnography only. It would have not been possible without them, and they didn't only contributed to the logistics or the translation, but they contributed intellectually, conceptually, by trying and find always new things that were worth exploring and bringing to my attention things that I would have overlooked. So this is us at the end of fieldwork for a well-deserved treat in a very posh restaurant. Now, going back to some of the more mundane ethnographic aspects, there was a lot of routine, compiling my field notes every evening very diligently, because we are a bit obsessed as anthropologists to forget any small, minimal details. Although when I was going through these field notes the other day, I found some field notes that really de-romanticize my experience there, such as these, in which I say, this was just a crazy day that kind of messed up all my week and that I would love to forget. I put this here because I think there is, again, a lot of myth about how easy and exciting it is to be an ethnographer out there, but it's not always as easy. And sorry if I go a bit pessimistic or dramatic in the next few slides, but I've tried to return the human face of doing ethnography, which is something as anthropologists we don't talk about enough. I needed to be very flexible. There were a lot of plans cancelled, me going to Langas and not finding the people that were supposed to meet me. And that's why I put a chameleon there, which looks quite grumpy, but also kind of resonates with the purpose of always changing their colors from red of embarrassment to green of rage, but ultimately just standing there and being in a precarious balance. We didn't really have any missed opportunities, because even if plans might have been cancelled at the last minute, Collins and Nancy would always make up a backup plan. So I think flexibility is very important when doing ethnography in practice. And so is venturesomeness. Sorry, I've tried to practice pronouncing this word and still missed it. What I was trying to describe is that there were a lot of things I got involved into that weren't necessarily related to energy or to cooking, but again, were still very important for people's life, and they helped contextualize and place energy in the right place. There were a lot of other needs people needed to fulfill, such as getting fresh water. And if I had taken a tokenistic, compartmentalized approach to my research question, I would have probably have missed what energy means for people, because I would have not seen how it relates to the need of fetching water, of taking the kids to school, of how things are divided between genders within households. So I tried to be curious and engage also in activities that seemed unrelated. But I was also very lonely. This is a snapshot of me watching the final of the World Cup, England versus Italy. Italy won, while being very far from my home and my dears, because no one could travel to Kenya, obviously, while I was there, and I couldn't travel home. And he's me eating pasta and fake parmesan while hoping that Italy won, and it did, luckily. There was a lot of fatigue, and I think an important aspect of doing ethnography is also recognizing when you're tired and you cannot absorb things anymore, because when you're doing ethnography, you're immersed and all your senses are active. You're constantly learning new things, and it's exhausting. And I think it's a very important thing to recognize when you're done or where you need a break. And that's why I've put this picture of me taking a picture of Langas from a distance, because I had to slow down in certain moments. And especially I had to slow down when I got COVID and I got hospitalized. That was a very scary time, but very interesting anthropologically to be taken care of by the private healthcare in Kenya. I put yielding as a word because it kind of described the act of letting go of things you can't control. You could have a plan, but things never go to plan. So sometimes you have just to recognize not only that you're tired and lonely, but also that there are things that no one can control, and you just need to take care of yourself, which I think resonates very well with what Orla started us off in her presentation. And care, a core feminist principle. These were the COVID time. You would have seen a lot of pictures of me with the mask on, constantly washing our hands, constantly keeping a log of who we met when, in case someone got COVID like me, and we had to track back who we had been in contact with. It was a very routine, mundane act of constantly reminding ourselves we needed to take care of people, and especially of vulnerable people and the research community. But it was also a lot of self-care. Obviously, ethnographers do not suspend their life totally while they are abroad for extensive period of time, otherwise they would be miserable. So I've made a lot of friends, I've done a lot of trips. Kenya is an amazing country, and this is me with some friends in Masai Mara just the week before I got COVID, actually. A lot of emotion went through my ethnographic experience in Kenya. The last slides, it's a bit embarrassing, and it's me looking like Holy Mary, I've been told. And I think the word that describe it is depletion, because I was utterly done by the end, and very, very tired. But I was also very grateful that I could go, and for all I've learned while I was there. And I felt very privileged, and one of the few people in the world that could travel and go out there during the COVID pandemic, despite the restrictions. Now, just to wrap up, I've tried to condense these words into what wants to mimic the JustGESI logo and the hands that hold each other together, to lead to some key point of my feminist way of knowing. I think doing research in Langas was a feminist way of knowing, because I was trying to value lived experience as knowledge, and the people of Langas were not subjects or data points, but they were knowers, and I tried to take them seriously as legitimate sources of insights and to learn from them, from their everyday experiences, especially those of marginalized group and women. I try to learn with them and not about them, so try and do things with them, participating, engaging, listening, learning. I try to challenge power hierarchies and to recognize when I was privileged and my positionality, and mostly to try and give them authority and putting myself in a position of a learner that is grateful for them to teach me things. But I also tried and be reflexive and recognize, obviously, my own position, and keep very reflexive about that and how I was situated in that informal settlement, and be careful, hold my ethics, and be responsible, prioritizing care, not only because of the COVID-19 pandemic, but because of all the vulnerable situation and occasion we witnessed. And attention to gendered and intersecting realities, poverty, labor, safety, care work, age, migration were all aspects that I needed to question constantly, and to avoid treating people as an homogeneous group. And again, I would have not been able to be as attentive or reflexive or situated if it wasn't for the help I got from Collins and Nancy. So I'm really grateful this ethnography in practice happened. But again, it's not only my ethnography, it's our ethnography. And you can find more, again, in my method chapter, but this was my last slide. Apologies if I talked very fast, but I was conscious we were going a bit over time, and I trust that if you have more questions or you want to expand, me to expand on anything, you can ask me now.